General Hospital spoilers tease that Jason Morgan's instincts, sharpened through years of betrayal, violence, and secrets, had been prickling with unease ever since Brennan returned to Port Charles and quietly slipped back into a position of influence within the WSB. On the surface, Brennan was as polished as ever, cloaked in formality and strategic calm, but there was something beneath the veneer that didn't sit right with Jason. It was the subtle way Brennan maneuvered around questions, the calculated timing of his appearances, and most notably, the cold void in his eyes when speaking of Anna Devane. Jason had learned long ago to trust those silences more than words. The tipping point came when Anna, in the middle of investigating something tied to Brennan's tenure in the WSB, vanished without a trace. No texts, no final calls, no leads. She was simply gone. Her disappearance wasn't just sudden, it was surgical, precisely executed, leaving no electronic breadcrumbs behind. Jason immediately suspected foul play, and not just any foul play, but something orchestrated by someone with deep ties to the agency. Brennan's name surged to the front of Jason's mind. But suspicion wasn't enough, he needed proof. Carly Corinthos had her own worries, though they stemmed from a different source. Her daughter Jocelyn had grown increasingly anxious, frequently looking over her shoulder, jumping at unexpected sounds, and becoming visibly withdrawn. At first, Carly chalked it up to Jocelyn dealing with residual trauma from past threats, but the pattern became too distinct to ignore. Jocelyn finally confessed that she felt like someone was following her. She had seen a man in a gray coat and dark sunglasses outside of her dorm 3 times in 1 week. Each time, he never approached, never spoke, just observed. It had begun to feel like she was being studied. Carly didn't waste a second. She called Jason. When she laid out Jocelyn's fears, his gut clenched. The timing wasn't coincidental. Anna had disappeared while digging into a file connected to WSB operations, specifically one titled Duskfall. Jason, through his limited access, knew it had been sealed under Brennan's personal clearance level. More disturbingly, it was flagged as a Level 0 black file, a classification reserved for the most dangerous and unethical covert missions. Jason didn't go to Brennan immediately. Instead, he went to Damian Spinelli. If there was any way into the WSB's digital fortress, Spinelli would find it. It took 3 days of non-stop code cracking, rerouted proxies, and dangerously illegal subroutines, but Spinelli cracked into a partial file cluster under the Duskfall archive. What he found was chilling. The name Jocelyn Jacks appeared in connection to a genetic augmentation program piloted over a decade ago. It appeared she had been flagged for observation due to markers in her DNA that aligned with a defunct military experiment aiming to increase cognitive and immunological function in early childhood subjects. Jason stared at the screen, then at the printed documents. Jocelyn had been watched since childhood. Brennan had been part of the WSB division that oversaw the project's earliest phases. The implications were staggering, and the danger was immediate. Meanwhile, Anna awoke disoriented and bound in a sterile, windowless room, her mind already assembling the puzzle pieces she'd barely begun connecting back in Port Charles. Her last memory was accessing Brennan's private files, specifically the Duskfall archive. She had just cracked a minor portion of the encryption when everything went black. She'd underestimated how far Brennan would go to protect whatever this was. She'd been in intelligence for decades, but even she had rarely seen a cover-up this pristine. Her instincts told her it wasn't just about Jocelyn, it was about something larger, something the WSB had buried so deeply it had rotted from the inside. And Brennan, poised and ruthless, was at the center of it. But why now? Why resurface this particular file? Why target Jocelyn after all this time? Back in Port Charles, Jason decided to bait Brennan. He uploaded a false memo to the WSB's network indicating that Anna's last known coordinates had been triangulated to a facility in upstate New York. Within hours, the file was accessed from Brennan's terminal. That was all the confirmation Jason needed. He immediately reached out to Lisa Albrecht. Albrecht, ever the pragmatist, had her own reasons to distrust Brennan. Her time on the WSB's outer ring had given her glimpses of the Black Ops world, and Brennan's name had been whispered even then, always in association with disappearances, unethical tests, and failed agents turned into ghosts. She agreed to help. Together, they traced the digital trail left behind by Brennan's desperate sweep to remove all traces of Anna's location. But not all traces could be erased, not from someone as meticulous as Albrecht. The coordinates led them to a decommissioned facility nestled deep within a stretch of forest rarely traversed even by locals. Jason, Albrecht, and a small tactical team entered under the cover of darkness. What they found was chilling: multiple rooms with medical restraints, outdated yet functional monitoring equipment, and files, hard copies detailing a series of experiments that bore chilling resemblance to the Duskfall Initiative. Subjects were listed by code name, but one stood out: specimen JJ Alpha female, age 6 at time of initial observation, listed with parentage redacted but matching several identifiers from Jocelyn's public records. They found Anna there, bruised but alive, mentally sharper than ever. Once freed, she wasted no time debriefing them on what she'd uncovered before being taken. Brennan had overseen more than just one operation. He'd helped orchestrate an entire generation of covert genetic surveillance projects, flagging children of key targets or genetically favorable profiles for long-term study. Jocelyn had been flagged not because of Jax, but potentially due to someone else in her lineage. The WSB believed that Carly herself had been exposed to something during her time with Sonny, something passed to her unborn child without anyone's knowledge. Anna believed Brennan had been called back not just to reclaim his post, but to erase the last traces of the Duskfall Initiative. And that meant eliminating anyone with knowledge of it, including Anna, Jason, and now Jocelyn. They had interrupted the first part of his plan, but he was far from finished. Back at the Corinthos compound, Carly struggled with the weight of Anna's revelations. Her daughter had been part of something monstrous without her knowledge. Jason tried to explain it wasn't her fault, but Carly wouldn't hear it. Her instincts as a mother were screaming now: Jocelyn needed protection, and Brennan had just declared a silent war on her family. Anna began preparing to go public. It was the only way to protect the remaining children who might still be on the WSB's hidden watch lists. But doing so would mean revealing her own complicity, her silence over the years, the mission she didn't question, the orders she followed blindly. It could mean the end of her career, maybe even her freedom. But she was ready. She would not let another child suffer under the weight of secrets she helped uphold. Jason knew this wasn't over. Brennan had disappeared without a trace, leaving behind just enough to remind them he was always 10 steps ahead. But for once, they weren't alone. Carly was ready to burn down the world for her daughter. Albrecht had vowed to hunt down every remnant of Duskfall with scientific precision. And Anna, scarred but unbroken, was preparing for the reckoning of her life. They would find Brennan. They would expose the truth. And Jocelyn would never have to look over her shoulder again. But first, they had to uncover the final secret buried in the depths of the WSB's dark history, the real reason Jocelyn had been chosen, and what Brennan still intended to do with her if he ever got close enough again. Jason knew that silence was never safety, not when someone like Brennan had vanished into the shadows with a trail of secrets behind him. After rescuing Anna and learning the horrific truth behind Duskfall, he had hoped Brennan would stay in hiding, but somewhere deep down, he knew that men like Brennan didn't retreat, they recalculated. And if Brennan was recalculating, it meant the danger wasn't over. In fact, it was likely just beginning. Anna, ever the strategist, wasn't just preparing to expose the WSB's sins, she was rebuilding her own network from the ashes. Once a respected pillar of the agency, she now found herself a pariah in their eyes. But what the WSB forgot was that Anna had forged alliances that existed outside their reach. She called on old friends, retired agents, and informants who owed her their lives. Whispers from Munich, encrypted chatter from Lisbon, scattered clues from Istanbul all pointed to one conclusion: Brennan wasn't acting alone. He was the face of something much older, something buried deep inside the agency's structure. A faction had survived the last internal purge, and they were committed to preserving the shadows that gave them power. At the center of that web was Jocelyn. She had returned to Port Charles, trying to pretend everything was normal, but the truth was impossible to ignore. She felt like she had a spotlight burning on her back. She couldn't step outside without questioning who might be watching. Her instincts were raw, fragile, and for the first time in her life, she didn't feel safe in her own home. She began poring over old journals, family histories, photos, trying to find answers. It was then she stumbled upon an old envelope tucked in one of her mother's keepsake boxes. The letter inside was from her grandmother Bobby, dated decades earlier, referencing a strange illness Carly had as a teenager during a brief trip to Europe. The symptoms aligned eerily with what Anna had mentioned: signs of exposure to experimental compounds, likely unknown even to the subjects themselves. Had Carly been part of something before she even met Sonny or Jax? Jason and Anna met quietly at the edge of town, near the cliffs overlooking the water where many secrets in Port Charles had been buried. Anna had intercepted chatter that Brennan had resurfaced near Berlin, but she didn't believe it. It was too easy, too obvious. Jason agreed. Brennan was still playing the long game, and until they figured out his next move, they were reacting instead of leading. But Jason had another plan, one that required risk, but could draw Brennan out. He wanted to leak a fabricated file suggesting Jocelyn had undergone an activation event, a fake medical report claiming her dormant genetic sequence had been triggered, possibly unlocking the capabilities the WSB had once hoped to study. It was dangerous, but it would force Brennan's hand. If he believed Jocelyn was now live, he would act. Spinelli once again inserted himself into the digital battlefield, planting the false data inside a highly encrypted WSB archive used only by former high-clearance agents. Within hours, they saw signs the file had been accessed. The digital footprint led not to Berlin, but to Buenos Aires. Anna called in a favor and confirmed Brennan had last passed through Argentina 2 days earlier. He was chasing the bait. Now it was just a matter of where he would strike next. Carly refused to let Jocelyn out of her sight. She tried to keep things normal: coffee at Kelly's, occasional visits to the gallery, but she couldn't shake the growing paranoia. She asked Sonny for help, knowing full well their history was complicated and raw, but when it came to Jocelyn, they were united. Sonny placed guards in plain clothes across key spots in town, ordered his people to watch the airport, train stations, even private docks. But even he admitted it wouldn't be enough if Brennan wanted in. The man had escaped detection for decades. No city, no matter how secure, could truly stop him. Meanwhile, Anna traced a contact of Brennan's in Vienna, a woman who had once served as his assistant during his tenure with a covert bioethics division. She was in hiding, terrified, convinced the WSB was still watching her. Anna convinced her to talk by revealing Brennan's current operation. What the woman revealed was darker than anything Anna had imagined. Brennan had taken a fragment of the Duskfall program and adapted it into a new project, something called Second Signal. It was designed to remotely trigger latent neural sequences using sound waves embedded in everyday frequencies, music, phone calls, even television broadcasts. The implications were terrifying. If Jocelyn had ever been truly modified, Brennan now had the means to turn her into a weapon without ever being in the same room. Jason didn't waste a second. He brought Jocelyn and Carly to a secure underground facility outside of town, an old bunker Sonny had once used during a cartel war. There, Anna and Albrecht began running tests, carefully scanning Jocelyn for any sign of neurological anomalies. Albrecht, with her mix of brilliance and cold detachment, treated the task like surgery. Hours passed. Then, quietly, she turned to Jason and confirmed their worst fear. There was a dormant sequence in Jocelyn's neural mapping, something foreign, artificially layered atop her natural patterns. It wasn't active, but it was real. Jocelyn was furious. She felt violated, like her body had been stolen from her without her knowledge. Carly tried to comfort her, but the betrayal ran deep. All this time, her choices, her thoughts, had they really been hers? Or had someone been silently preparing her for something she never agreed to? She stood alone for a long time, staring at her reflection in the small mirror bolted to the concrete wall, trying to decide who she really was now. Anna insisted they could fight this. She proposed a dangerous solution: use the fake activation signal Jason had planted, but amplify it through a controlled broadcast. If Brennan believed the signal had been triggered organically, he would come in person. He would want to see the results himself. It was risky, it would mean using Jocelyn as bait, but it was the only way to end this. Jason didn't want to agree, but Jocelyn made the decision for him. She said she was done running, done being afraid. She wanted her life back, and if facing Brennan was the only way to get it, she was ready. Carly broke down in silence, but didn't stop her. The broadcast went live 2 days later during a live event in Port Charles, one of those annual fundraising galas full of champagne and masks, perfect for hiding in plain sight. Jocelyn stood beneath the lights, her smile forced but powerful, as the modified audio frequency rippled out through speakers disguised as part of the event. Jason, Anna, Carly, and Sonny were stationed at all exits. Albrecht monitored the signal's effect in real time, watching Jocelyn's vitals. Nothing spiked. No changes. But then, near the end of the night, the lights flickered. For just a second. And in that second, everything changed. Jocelyn collapsed. Jason rushed forward. Anna scanned the crowd. Carly screamed. And Brennan, dressed in a waiter's uniform, calmly walked past a guard and slipped into the shadows. But he hadn't come to kill. He had come to trigger. He had embedded a secondary frequency into the facility itself, something only Albrecht later discovered when dissecting the speaker system. Brennan had used their trap as his own weapon. Jocelyn was now in a coma, her neural patterns in chaos. Albrecht couldn't determine what exactly had been activated. Now the fight wasn't just about catching Brennan, it was about saving Jocelyn's mind. Anna vowed to return to the WSB archives, to find the original Duskfall documents, no matter how buried they were. Jason began assembling a team to track Brennan to the ends of the earth. Carly sat by Jocelyn's side, whispering stories, begging her daughter to fight. And somewhere in the dark, Brennan watched and waited, knowing the endgame had finally begun. Shall I continue with another 1,000 words to predict the final outcome?